So I want to warn you, this next speaker is one of my personal, I don't want to say idols, but like someone I definitely look up to. And he's got a CV that's this long. So we'll get started. Our keynote speaker for today is Dr. Michael Greger. And this is sponsored by the Ezekiel R. and Edna Wattis Dumke Foundation. Dr. Greger attended Cornell University School of Agriculture for his undergraduate studies and then went to Tufts University School of Medicine, where he graduated his MD in 1999. He specialized in clinical nutrition, which is really odd for a physician, but really cool, very useful. He is the New York Times best-selling author of several books, including How Not to Die, which he'll be speaking on right now, How Not to Diet, which would be, and then How to Survive a Pandemic. Dr. Greger is one of the founding members and a fellow of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, and we are fellows. I'm a fellow too. His work involves sharing nutritional facts through his nonprofit, nutritionfacts.org, as you saw on the screen, where he and his team comb through thousands of research articles to provide easy-to-understand data for about the best foods to promote a healthy lifestyle. And this is so that professionals and the general public can understand. So we're putting this information in the hands of everyone. It's really cool. He is an internationally recognized speaker on nutrition, food safety, and public health issues. And we got him today. His passion for plant-based diets drives his work toward educating others so they can lead healthier lives. Please welcome Ogden Surgical Medical Society keynote speaker, Dr. Michael Greger.
All right. Allow me to begin on a personal note. This is a picture of me taken around the time that my grandmother was diagnosed with end-stage heart disease and sent home to die. She already had so many bypass surgeries. She got so scarred up, there's nothing more they could do. Confined in a wheelchair, crushing chest pain. Her life was over at age 65. Then she heard about this guy, Nathan Pritikin, one of our early lifestyle medicine pioneers, and what happened next is actually detailed in Pritikin's biography. He talks about my grandma was one of the death's door people. Frances Greger, my grandmother, arrived at one of Pritikin's early sessions in a wheelchair. Mrs. Greger had heart disease, angina, claudication, her condition so bad she could no longer walk without great pain in her chest and legs. Within 3 weeks, though, she was not only out of her wheelchair, she was walking 10 miles a day. Here's a picture of my grandma at her grandson's wedding, 15 years after doctors had abandoned her to die. Though she was given a medical death sentence at age 65, thanks to a healthy diet, was able to enjoy another 31 years on this earth, to continue to enjoy her 6 kids, including me, till age 96. That's why I went into medicine. Now, years later, when Dr. Dean Ornish published his lifestyle heart trial proving with some called quantitative angiography that indeed heart disease could be reversed, arteries opened up without drugs, without surgery, just a plant-based diet and other healthy lifestyle behaviors, I assumed this was going to be the game changer. I mean, my family had seen it with their own eyes, but here it was, in black and white, published in some of the most prestigious medical journals in the world, yet nothing happened. So wait a second, if effectively the cure to our number one killer could get lost down some rabbit hole and ignored, what else might there be in the medical literature that could help my patients but just didn't have a corporate budget driving its promotion? Well, I made it my life's mission to find out. For those of you who aren't familiar with my work, every year I do every issue of every English language nutrition journal in the world, so busy folks like you don't have to. I think compile the most interesting, the most groundbreaking, the most practical findings in new videos and articles I upload every day to my nonprofit site, nutritionfacts.org. Everything on the website is free. There are no ads, no corporate sponsorships, strictly non-commercial, not selling anything. Just put it up as a public service, as a labor of love, as a tribute to my grandmother, whose own life was saved with this evidence plant-based nutrition. Where did Pritikin get his evidence from? Well, a network of missionary hospitals set out throughout sub-Saharan Africa uncovered what may be one of the most important advances in health, according to one of our most preeminent medical figures of the last century, Dr. Dennis Burkitt, the fact that many of our major and commonest diseases were universally rare. Like heart disease, for example. In the African population of Uganda, for example, coronary artery disease was almost entirely non-existent. You say, wait a second. Our number one killer, almost non-existent. What were they eating? Well, they were eating lots of vegetables and greens and grains, and their protein almost entirely from plant sources, and they had the cholesterol levels to prove it, very similar to what we see in kind of modern-day plant eaters to this day. So wait a second. Maybe they were just dying early from something else, never lived long enough to get heart disease. No, here's age-matched heart attack rates in Uganda versus St. Louis. Out of 632 autopsies in Uganda, only one myocardial infarction. Whereas out of 632 age and gender-matched autopsies in Missouri, 136 myocardial infarctions, more than 100 times the rate of our leading killer. In fact, they were so blown away, went back, did another 800 autopsies. Still, just that one small healed infarct, meaning it wasn't even the cause of death, out of 1,427 patients, less than 1 in 1,000, whereas here, of course, heart disease is an epidemic. Atherosclerosis, hardening of the arteries, is a disease that begins in childhood. By age 10, nearly all kids raised on the standard American diet already have fatty streaks building up inside of their arteries, the first stage of the disease. These streaks then turn into plaques in our 20s, get worse in our 30s, and then can start killing us off. In our heart, of course, it can cause a myocardial infarction. Our brain, it can cause a stroke. So, if there is anyone here this morning older than age 10, then the question is not whether or not to eat healthy to prevent heart disease. It's whether you want to reverse the heart disease you likely already have, whether you know it or not. But is that even possible? You know, when researchers took people with heart disease, put them on the kind of plant-based diet followed by populations that do not get epidemic heart disease, their hope was maybe we could slow the disease down a little bit, maybe even reverse it, stop it, arrest it. Well, something miraculous happened. As soon as people stopped eating artery-clogging diets, their bodies were able to start dissolving some of that plaque away, opening up arteries without drugs, without surgery, suggesting their bodies wanted to be healthy all along, but were just never given the chance. You can see the blood flow to the heart muscle itself here on the left was after just 3 weeks of plant-based nutrition. Let me share with you what's been called the best-kept secret in all of medicine. Best-kept secret in medicine is that sometimes, under the right conditions, the body can actually heal itself. You know, if you whack your shin really hard on a coffee table or something, getting red, hot, painful, swollen, inflamed, but will heal naturally if you just stand back, let your body work its magic. All right, what if you whack your shin in the same place day after day? All right? It'd never heal. You go to your doctor and be like, my shin hurts. They'd be like, no problem. Whip out their pad, write a prescription for painkillers. Right? You're still whacking your shin, still really hurts like heck. It feels so much better with those pain pills on board. Thank heavens for modern medicine. Right? You know, it's like, when we give nitroglycerin for crushing chest pain. Tremendous relief, but not doing anything to treat the underlying cause of the disease. Our body wants to come back to health if we let it, but if we keep re-injuring ourselves, if we keep stabbing ourselves with a fork 3 times a day, we may never heal. It's like smoking. And one of those amazing things I learned in all my medical training was within about 15 years of stopping smoking, your lung cancer risk approaches that of a lifelong non-smoker. Like, isn't that amazing? Right? You can clear out all that tar, and eventually it's almost as if you never started smoking at all. And every morning of our smoking life, that healing process starts until, wham, first cigarette of the day. re-injuring our lungs with every bite, just like we can re-injure our arteries, or re-injuring our lungs with every puff, just like we can re-injure our arteries with every bite, when all we had to do all along, the miracle cure, is just stand back, get out of the way, stop re-damaging ourselves, and let our body's natural healing processes bring us back towards health. Sure, we can choose moderation, hit ourselves with a smaller hammer, but why beat yourself up at all? This is nothing new. American Heart Journal, 1977, cases like Mr. FW here. Heart disease so bad, couldn't even make it to the mailbox. Started eating healthier. A few months later, he was climbing mountains, no pain. All right, wow. Now, of course, there are these new classes of anti-angina drugs on the market now. Cost thousands of dollars a year. But hey, at the highest dose, may be able to extend exercise duration as long as 33 and a half seconds. Doesn't look like those choosing the drug route are going to be climbing mountains anytime soon. Right? See, plant-based eating isn't just safer and cheaper. It can be more effective because you're treating the underlying cause of the disease. Now, normally at this point, I move on to killer number 2, cancer, talk about the role diet may play in preventing, arresting, reversing each of our top 15 killers, but wanted to have a lot of time for questions today. And so, in a certain sense, what more do we need to know? There's only one diet ever been proven to reverse heart disease in the majority of patients, a plant-based diet. So anytime someone tries to sell you on some new diet, do me a favor, ask them one simple question. Wait a second, has this diet been proven to reverse heart disease? The number one reason me and all my loved ones, my patients will die? The answer is no. Why would you even consider it, right? If that's all a plant-based diet can do, reverse the number one killer of men and women. Shouldn't that kind of be the default diet until proven otherwise? And the fact that can also be so effective in preventing, arresting, reversing other leading killers like type 2 diabetes and high blood pressure would seem to make the case for plant-based eating simply overwhelming. Let me touch on those two conditions, though. Diabetes, for example, we've known that type 2 diabetes can be prevented, arrested, and reversed since the 1930s. Here they took a small group of diabetics, put them on a form of a plant-based diet, and 5 years later, a quarter of them were able to get off their insulin altogether. Say, yeah, wait a second. Well, plant-based diets tend to be relatively low-calorie diets. Maybe their diabetes just got better because they lost so much weight. To tease that out, what you'd have to do is put people on a healthy diet, but force them to eat so much food that they don't lose any weight. Then we could see if there's some kind of unique benefits to plant-based eating beyond just all the easy weight loss. Well, we'd have to wait 35 years, but here we go. Here's subjects who were weighed every day. If they started to lose weight, they're made to eat more food. In fact, so much more food, some of the participants have problems eating it all. They're like, oh, not another salad. Oh. But eventually they adapted. So no weight loss despite restricting meat, eggs, dairy, and junk. Okay. So with no weight loss, was there any benefit to the diabetes? Well, insulin needs were cut 60% across the board, and half the diabetics ended off all their insulin altogether. Wow. How many years did that take? No. 16 days. 16 days later. So we're talking diabetics who've had diabetes as long as 20 years, injecting 20 units of insulin a day, then 13 days later on none. Diabetes for 20 years, then off all insulin in less than 2 weeks. Diabetes for 20 years because no one had told them about a plant-based diet. For decades, they were just 13 days away at any time from being free. Here's participant number 15, 32 units of insulin on the control diet, and then 18 days later on none. Lower blood sugars on 32 units less insulin. That's the power of plants. And as a bonus, their cholesterol fell like a rock to under 150, again, in only about 2 weeks. So, just like making modest changes in diet will only net you kind of moderate benefits in terms of cholesterol reduction, how moderate do you want your diabetes? Moderation in all things, but it's not necessarily a good thing. You know, asking our diabetics to make moderate changes in diet can leave them with moderate blindness, moderate kidney failure, moderate amputation, maybe just a few toes or something. Everything in moderation is not necessarily a good thing. You know, there's a famous study published in a journal called Cell Metabolism, which was characterized as saying diets high in meat, eggs, and dairy could be harmful to health as smoking, suggesting 4 times the risk of cancer or diabetes for those eating lots of animal protein in middle age. If you look at the actual study, you see that's simply not true. Those eating more animal protein in middle age didn't have 4 times the risk of dying from diabetes. They had 73 times the risk of dying from diabetes. Now, those that chose moderation, only eating a moderate amount of animal protein, they just had 23 times the risk of death from diabetes. The academic institution where the study was done sent out a press release with a memorable opening line: "That chicken wing you're eating could be as deadly as a cigarette," explaining, look, quadrupling one's risk of dying from cancer, those eating lots of animal protein, is kind of comparable to what one might get with smoking. So what was the reaction from the scientific community to this revelation that diets high in meat, eggs, and dairy could be harmful to health as smoking? Well, one nutrition scientist said it was potentially dangerous to tell people about this study. Why? Because a smoker might think, hey, why bother quitting smoking? My ham and cheese sandwich is just as bad for me. So, let's not tell anyone about this thing. That reminds me of this famous Philip Morris cigarette ad that tried to downplay the risks of secondhand smoke by saying, hey, you think secondhand smoke is bad, increasing risk of lung cancer 19%. Well, hey, drinking 1 or 2 glasses of milk 3 times the best, 62% increased risk of lung cancer. Or doubling your risk frequently cooking with oil, tripling your risk of heart disease by eating non-vegetarian, multiplying your risk 6-fold if you eat lots of meat and dairy. So, they conclude, let's keep some perspective here. The risk from secondhand smoke may be well below that of other everyday activities, so breathe deep. It's like saying don't worry about getting stabbed, because getting shot is so much worse. How about neither? 2 risks don't make a right. Now, of course, you'll note that Philip Morris stopped throwing dairy under the bus once they purchased Kraft Foods. Just saying. All right, let me skip down to high blood pressure here. We are talking 78 million Americans affected. That's about 1 in 3 American adults. And as we get older, our pressures get higher and higher, such that by age 60, most of us have high blood pressure. So wait a second. I mean, if most people develop hypertension when they get older, maybe it's not a disease, more just kind of an inevitable consequence of aging. No, we've known since the 1920s that high blood pressure need not occur. They measured the blood pressures of 1,000 people living in rural Kenya. A typical Kenyan diet, something like this: beans and grains, and corn, vegetables, fruit. Our pressures go up as we age, such that most of us are hypertensive. By the time that we're in our 60s, their pressures went down with age, and the lower, the better. The 120/80 cutoff is actually an arbitrary cutoff. Just like we see with so many other cutoffs, it turns out that the ideal blood pressure, the no benefit from reducing it further blood pressure, 110/70. What? Is it even possible to get pressures down to 110/70? It's not just possible, it's normal for those eating healthy enough diets. So over 2 years, this rural Kenyan hospital, 1,800 patients were admitted. How many cases of high blood pressure did they find? 0. Wow, they must have had low rates of heart disease, right? No, they had no rates of heart disease. Not a single case of arteriosclerosis was found. Rural China, same thing, about 110/70 their entire lives. 70-year-olds, same blood pressure as 16-year-olds. Say, wait a second, Asian diets, African diet, vastly different diets. What they shared in common is that they're plant-based day to day with meat only eaten on special occasions. And they say, well, why do we think it's the plant-based nature of their diets that was so protective? Because in the Western world, according to the American Heart Association, the only folks getting it down that low on average are those eating these strictly plant-based diets, coming in perfect at an average of about 110/65. This is the largest study of plant-based eaters to date, the Adventist II study, looking at 89,000 Californians, comparing non-vegetarians, so-called semi-vegetarians, those who eat meat more on like a once-a-week basis rather than a daily basis, compared to those who eat no meat except fish, compared to those who eat no meat, period, compared to those who eat no meat, eggs, or dairy. And this is an Adventist study, so even the non-vegetarians actually didn't eat a lot of meat and tend to eat lots of fruits and vegetables and not smoke and exercise. This is a really healthy cohort of meat eaters, but still, we found this stepwise drop in high blood pressure rates the more and more plant-based people tended to eat. Same thing with diabetes. Same thing with obesity. So yeah, sure, you can throw the vast majority of your risk out the window by eating strictly plant-based, but it's not all or nothing. It's not black or white. Any movement we can make along this spectrum towards eating healthier can accrue significant benefits. Right? You can show this experimentally. You take vegetarians, give them meat, pay them enough to eat it, and their blood pressures go up. Or you take people who already eat meat, remove meat from their diet, their blood pressures go down within 7 days, and this is after the vast majority had to stop their blood pressure medications or reduce their blood pressure medications. They had to. I mean, once you treat the cause, right? If you don't have high blood pressure anymore and you're on multiple blood pressure medications, you can drive your pressures too low. You get dizzy, fall over, hurt yourself, right? So you have to pull off these drugs. You have to wean people off. So lower pressures on fewer meds within 7 days. That's the power of plants. So, does the American Heart Association recommend a no-meat diet? No, they recommend a low-meat diet, the so-called DASH diet. So wait a second, when the DASH diet was created, I mean, were they just not aware of this landmark research done by Harvard's Frank Sachs? No, they were aware the chair of the design committee that came up with the DASH diet was Frank Sachs. See, the DASH diet was created with the number one goal of capturing the blood pressure lowering benefits of more plant-based diet, yet contained enough animal products to make it palatable to the general public. They didn't think the public could handle the truth, right? But you can totally see what they were thinking, right? Just like drugs never work unless you actually take them, diets never work at all unless you actually eat them. So they're like, look, on a population scale, how many people are going to eat a strictly plant-based diet? So on a population scale, if we kind of come up with a compromise diet, we kind of soft pedal the message, well, then overall, we might actually do more good. Okay. Tell that to the 1,000 American families a day that lose a family member to high blood pressure. Maybe it's time to start telling the American public the truth, which is that most deaths in the United States are preventable and related to nutrition. According to the Global Burden of Disease Study, the largest study of risk factors in human history funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the number one cause of death in these United States is the American diet. Leading cause of disability, our diet. So now, cigarettes have been bumped to number 2. Cigarettes now only kill about 500,000 Americans every year, whereas our diet kills many more. Right? So wait a second. If most deaths are preventable related to nutrition, number one cause of death and disability, well then obviously nutrition is the number one thing taught in medical school, right? Obviously, it's the thing your doctor talks to you about at every single visit, right? How can there be this kind of disconnect between the science and mainstream practice of medicine? Well, to answer that question, let's do a little thought experiment. Imagine yourself a smoker back in the 1950s. You know, back in the 50s, the average per capita cigarette consumption was thousands of cigarettes, 4,000 cigarettes a year. So, meaning the average person walking around smoked half pack a day, on average. The media was telling people to smoke. Famous athletes agreed. Even Santa Claus wanted you to smoke. I mean, look, you want to keep fit and stay slender, so you make sure to smoke and eat lots of hot dogs to stay trim and eat lots of sugar to stay slim and trim. A lot better than that apple there. I mean, sheesh, right? Though apples do connote goodness and freshness, reads one internal tobacco industry memo, which brings up many possibilities for a youth-oriented cigarette. They wanted to make apple-flavored cigarettes for kids. Shameless. For digestion's sake, we could smoke. I mean, no curative power is claimed by Philip Morris, but hey, better be safe than sorry and smoke. Blow in her face and she'll follow you anywhere. No woman ever says no. They're so round, so firm, so fully packed. After all, John Wayne smoked them until he got lung cancer and died. You know, back then, even the paleo folks were smoking, and so were the doctors. Now, this is not to say there wasn't controversy within the medical profession. Sure, some doctors smoked Camels, but others preferred Lucky. So there was a little disagreement there. The leader of the U.S. Senate agreed. Who wouldn't want to give their throat a vacation? Not a single case of throat irritation. How could there be when cigarettes are just as pure as the water you drink? Maybe in Flint, Michigan. Don't worry, though, if your throat does get a little irritated, your doctor can always write you a prescription for cigarettes. This is the Journal of the American Medical Association. So when the AMA was on record saying that smoking on balance isn't just neutral but may be good for you, when the American Medical Association is saying that, where could you turn back then if you just wanted the facts? What's the new data advanced by science? Well, she was too tired for fun, and then she smoked a Camel. Babe Ruth spoke of proof positive medical science, that is when he still could speak, before he died of throat cancer. Now, if by some miracle back then there was some kind of smokingfacts.org website that could deliver the science directly, bypassing commercially corruptible institutional filters, you would have become aware of studies like this. There's an Adventist study out of California in 1958 showing that non-smokers had at least 90% less lung cancer than smokers. Of course, this wasn't the first. When famed surgeon Michael DeBakey was asked why his studies back in the 30s linking lung cancer and smoking were simply ignored off the face of the earth, he had to remind people what it was like back then. We were a smoking society. Smoking was on airplanes, on the movies. Medical meetings were one heavy haze of smoke. Smoking was, in a word, normal. So, back to our thought experiment here. If you're a smoker in the 1950s in the know, what do? I mean, with access to the science, you realize the best available balance of evidence is, yes, your smoking habit, not so good for you. So do you change or do you wait? I mean, if you wait until your doctor tells you between puffs to quit, you could have cancer by then. If you wait until the powers that be officially recognize it, like the Surgeon General did in the subsequent decade, you could be dead by then. It took more than 7,000 studies in the deaths of countless smokers before the first Surgeon General's report against smoking came out. Maybe they could give people a heads up after 6,000 studies or something. Powerful industry. Maybe we should have stopped smoking after the 700th study like this came out. But as a smoker in the 50s, on one hand, you had all of society, the government, the medical profession itself telling you to smoke. And on the other hand, all you had was the science. If you're even aware of studies like this, I'm going to fast forward 40 years or so. There's a new Adventist study out of California warning Americans about something else they may be putting in their mouths. Of course, it's not just one study. Put all the studies together. Significantly lower risk of all-cause mortality and many of our dreaded diseases. So, instead of a smoker in the 50s going along with America's smoking habits back then, imagine you, a loved one, a patient, going along with America's eating habits today. What do you do? I mean, with access to the science, you realize that the best available balance of evidence suggests your eating habits are not so good for you. So do you change or do you wait? I mean, if you wait until your doctor tells you between bites to change, maybe too late. In fact, even after the Surgeon General's report came out, the AMA officially went on record refusing to endorse it. Why? Could it have been because they were just handed a $10 million check by the tobacco industry? Maybe. Okay, so we can see why, the AMA was sucking up to the tobacco industry, but why weren't more individual doctors speaking up? There were a few ahead of their time, speaking up against industries killing millions, but why not more? Maybe it's because the majority of physicians themselves smoke cigarettes. Just like the majority of physicians today continue to eat foods that are contributing to our epidemics of dietary disease. What was the AMA's rallying cry back then? Everything in moderation. Extensive scientific studies proven smoking in moderation. Oh, that's fine. Sound familiar? Food industry uses the same tobacco industry tactics, twisting the science, misinformation. The same scientists for hire paid to downplay the risks of secondhand smoke and toxic chemicals are the same paid for by the National Confectioners Association to downplay the risks of candy, and the same paid for by the meat industry to downplay the risks of meat. Whereas processed foods and animal foods may be contributing to the deaths of 14 million people every year. Those of us involved in this evidence-based nutrition revolution, talking about 14 million lives in the balance every year. Whereas, today, plant-based eating can be considered kind of the nutritional equivalent of smoking cessation. How long do we have to wait, though, before the CDC says, don't wait for open-heart surgery to start eating healthier as well? Until the system changes. We need to take personal responsibility for our own health, for our family's health, for our patients' health. We can't wait until society catches up to the science because it's a matter of life and death. And a few years ago, Dr. Kim Williams became president of the American College of Cardiology. He was asked in an interview why he follows the same diet he recommends to all his patients, a strictly plant-based diet. I don't mind dying, Dr. Williams replied. I just don't want it to be my own fault. Thank you so much, everyone. Questions?
I have a question.
Please. Oh, we have mics. Great.
Yeah. So I think what gets in the way with change with people's diets is that it's an addictive habit to be eating these bad foods. And if you quit based upon the data that you're given, you might be able to quit, but because of all the exposure, it's like a heroin addict walking in society and every day they're offered heroin. And a lot of people who are changing their diets are kind of like the addicts who hit a low, right? And then they change their lifestyle, whether it's cancer or diabetes. But people who are on their way to that state of poor health where they can ignore it, they can ignore it for as long as possible until they hit that low, because it's a habit that is formed from a very early childhood with Halloween, Christmas, Easter, Thanksgiving. Sugar is everywhere. There's cola here in our beautiful conference. So we are continually exposed to refined sugars. We're continually exposed to cheese. there's ads, and there's a lot of profit behind these types of food habits. And it's very hard. Like, I went to Neil Bernard's conferences, and I tried a vegetarian more, and I lost a lot of weight. It lasted 2 weeks. And it's really hard to maintain stuff just based upon logic. It's like telling a heroin addict, you know, heroin's bad for you. Well, who doesn't know that, right? But how to translate that cognitively into actual, you know, like changes in these addictive habits is really difficult, I think, for everyone, even doctors, of course.
Yeah, we are surrounded, bombarded by messages to eat junk and fast food everywhere we look, everywhere we go. And so certainly, the industry can dig into these biological triggers, the same ones that get us to do illicit drugs. I mean, it's actually a very similar process. For example, for thousands of years, people have chewed coca leaves without apparent any harmful effects. But when you extract out the cocaine or make it even more concentrated in something like crack cocaine, then we have this exaggerated, dopamine hit, and can start that cycle. And similarly, if you take something, really healthy, like a sweet potato or beet or something, strip out all the nutrition, concentrate down the calories into table sugar. Most sugar comes from beets these days. Then we just get that concentrated hit. And of course, we evolved to seek out concentrated sources of calories and salt. And so the industry can kind of take advantage of our natural cravings toward high salt, high fatty, concentrated calorically foods. And so what can we do to combat that? Well, from the addiction literature, we have to try to have control over our food environment. So certainly at home, for example, if you have cookies in the cupboard and an apple, the first few days you can white knuckle it and eat that apple, but eventually you have a bad day, something will happen, you're going to go for the cookies, right? But what if there are no cookies in your house? I mean, what if there's just like a junk-free zone and the best you got, the most calorically dense, is like an apple? Eventually you get hungry and never going to eat that apple. You got to microwave that sweet potato. It's just like, you could walk down the corner store, but we are taking advantage of another evolutionary push of energy conservation to want to just sit on the couch all day. We'll use that to our advantage, not go down to the corner store and just kind of eat that apple instead. And you say, well, wait a second, I've got a family who doesn't eat like me. What do we do? Tell them to lock it in a safe. Put it in a little, you want junk in the house? Put it in something that you can't get access to. It's all about controlling our food environment. Of course, that'll get easier as the society switches over. I'm sure smokers are now they have refuges where they're no longer surrounded by smokers, and it's easier for people to quit. Similarly, as just the default options in institutional food services gets better, it'll just be easier to eat healthy. But there's that hump we have to get over where we know what we have to do. But unfortunately, we have a lot of biology and a lot of profit pushing us in the opposite direction. The good news is, and I really so glad this was brought up by our illustrious past speaker, is your taste buds change. So you put patients on I'm sure you've seen this, put patients on a low-salt diet, and they say, look, everything tastes like cardboard. There's no way, I'd rather live a shorter life, but there's just no way I could live like this. But then a miraculous thing happens. You do these studies in a lab, you have people salt soup to taste, put them on a low-salt diet, a few weeks later, give them the same soup, salt to taste, and the salt level before is actually too salty. They actually prefer lower salt soup. Our taste buds change within weeks such that natural, healthy foods, taste good. Just like a ripe peach would taste sour after a bowl of Fruit Loops, eventually, when you cut out all that junk, then all of a sudden, just like corn on the cob, no butter, no salt, actually tastes good. I know that sounds really crazy because our palates have been so deadened by this over salty, over fatty, over sugary foods or quote unquote foods that the industry tries to sell us. But all of a sudden, eventually, normal healthy foods taste good. I'm at the clinic eating a sweet potato with a little cinnamon on top. People look at me like I'm some aesthetic monk or something. It's like, oh, it's great that you could eat that way, but there's no way I could eat. But no, they don't realize, no, it actually tastes good to me. It didn't taste good to me when I was eating pepperoni pizza and Dr. Pepper, but now that my taste buds, you just got to get over that hump, where then all of a sudden, wait, you get the best of both worlds. Tastes great, and you get to live longer. That's what plant-based eating is all about. Yes.
So 2 questions for you. First, I would like you to comment on the ketogenic diet and how people are trying to use that to lose weight, kind of pros, cons, how they differ from a plant-based diet. Second, what do you see as a society being the ways will actually affect meaningful change? And how do we advocate for our poorer patients who live in those food swamps and deserts, like community gardens, et cetera? And I just kind of like, as physicians, how can we best advocate, in your opinion?
Thank you so much. I'm actually going to address the first question on ketogenic diets on the talk after lunch on evidence-based weight loss. So I'll hold off till then because I'll cover it in the talk, then be happy to talk about it in Q&A afterwards. And then in terms of my favorite question, what can we do about it? There's some really exciting things happening around the country. I encourage people to join the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. They have some wonderful resources for your community, your patients. One of the most innovative things that happened is new mayor of New York City, Eric Adams, made all lunches and suppers in the 11 public health hospitals in New York default plant-based, whole food plant-based, by default. Now, you can still order meat, go out of your way and order meat, but most patients are sticking with the default options. So that's millions, literally millions of meals every year. We're not taking away anybody's choices, but here we are as a healthcare industry, we are modeling healthy habits. Hospitals were actually the first workplaces to remove cigarette vending machines. And so actually, in some ways, medicine actually led the fight against tobacco, and we can do the same thing with diet. And part of that, we can model what we're feeding in our hospital cafeterias, both the patients and the staff. And so I really like that kind of default approach, and it works for organ donations, works for lots of kind of social ills where just that little extra energy activation requires people to kind of go out of their way makes the majority of people to just kind of stick with it, and they are healthier as a result.
What % of your patients, no matter how slowly they change their diet, persist with flatulent and bloating, and what do you do about it?
Oh, thank you so much for that question. And so it was mentioned before that if you rapidly ramp up your fiber intake, you can get gastrointestinal side effects. Actually, it doesn't occur in everybody, but if you do it quick enough, you can get a substantial percentage. Now, and it's just because, you've been slathering your guts with, milkshakes and cheeseburgers your whole life, and you just don't have the kind of fiber feeders. You don't have the machinery in your microbiome to be able to handle that. But, of course, the more you do it, the more you preferentially aid in the growth of the fiber feeders, the good bugs like, lactobacillus and bifidobacteria that produce those short-chain fatty acids that have all those benefits, both in the intestine and throughout the body. They can actually get absorbed through our colon lining and cross the blood-brain barrier, have all sorts of amazing effects. So in getting there, one can move slow. And there's experiments showing that you can go a little like, spoonful of chickpeas. We're going to start with there, and then we're going to ramp up slowly. And what happens, and so actually the gas formation, that's actually a sign it's working. Like if you ever fermented beer or fermented anything, bubbles are showing, that means fermentation is happening. That's the benefit is from the fermentation of fiber. But what happens, so you're like, oh, great, am I going to be gassy forever? No, what happens is you actually foster the growth of gas-consuming bacteria. So the fiber feeders go crazy, they produce this gas, and then the presence of gas fosters the growth of these gas-eating bacteria that then eat the gas. And so then you have this balance, and you can ramp up your fiber intake to what we see in kind of Paleolithic fossilized feces, where we probably evolved over millions of years, literally triple-digit fiber intake, 120 grams a day. So if that's normal for the human species, the fact that we're getting 10 times less that, no wonder we have suffering from some of these chronic digestive disorders, et cetera. So now, if you've had, if you've somehow assaulted your microbiome for whatever reason, through surgery or some specific antibiotics. There's things you can do to kind of restore a good balance. But naturally, but just sticking with it, again, getting over that hump, you kind of eventually end up with the best of both worlds.
What's your opinion of the vegetables and fruits that are advertised in pill form?
Yes, I don't know if we have any here at the conference, but there are, with the understanding that the most uncontroversial statement in all of clinical nutrition is eat more fruits and vegetables, which is to say eat more plants, because fruits are the fruits and vegetables are every other part of the plant that isn't a fruit. That companies, well, you can't make a lot of money selling produce, right? Because it goes bad. It rots on the shelf. It's like the worst thing. And you can't even brand it. Like, you'll never see an ad on the Super Bowl for sweet potatoes because, they'll buy your competitor's sweet potatoes. Like, it's just, the system is set up. What you want is a snack cake, a branded snack that sits on the shelf for a few weeks. That's how you make money, right? You can't make money. So the whole system is set up such that, a bottle of, flavored colored sugar water, pennies to make, sell it for a couple bucks, amazing. Okay. So you can't make money, but there's such this tremendous amount of evidence, eat fruits and vegetables. There have been some trying to profit off of that message by, let's put fruits and vegetables in a pill. So we'll freeze dry it, dehydrate it, put it in a little pill. And by freeze drying, you remove about 90%. Most fruits and vegetables about 90% water. And so by eating a pill this big, dehydrated fruits and vegetables, freeze-dried fruits and vegetables, you're actually eating, 10 of those. So maybe a die's worth of fruits and vegetables. Now, could you argue that's better than eating no fruits and vegetables? Okay, but we just don't have data suggesting that you can actually get the kind of benefits we see with eating, 500, 600, 700 grams of vegetables that you could ever get in kind of pill form. So I encourage people to get their fruits and vegetables in the produce aisle, not in the supplement aisle.
Thank you.
There's a health museum in Dresden, Germany, where there's a poster hanging from 1939 that says you should stop smoking because it causes lung cancer. I guess some governments can actually deal with that thing.
Yes, the fact that Hitler was big on smoking cessation, I don't know if I'd use that as the primary kind of, but it's true. We wanted to make, anyway, yeah. I don't know what we do with that, but yeah.
Hi, Dr. Greger, big fan. So I had one question, but your response to the last brought up a second thing in my mind, where you're speaking to, hey, our bodies know what to do with nutrients in real food and not the pill form. What are your thoughts as far as these fortified plant-based milks that are milk, but we're essentially putting calcium in, and it's not necessarily as natural? Of course, we can get it from plants as well, but that's one of the higher sources when it comes to plants.
So plant-based milks are, in fact, all these kind of plant-based, there's these kind of analogs, these kind of like plant-based meats, like Beyond Meat, Impossible Burger. I kind of put that all in the same as, soy milks and oat milks, and, I see that kind of a similar bucket of excellent transition foods. Like, what a great stepping stone towards a healthier diet. I mean, you take people who've just eaten the standard American diet their whole lives, they're not going to, no one's going to, kale and quinoa tomorrow, right? Okay, well, let's visit people where they are. You put this kind of milk on your cereal, or even better, on your oatmeal in the morning. Well, let's just put this kind of milk, right? You eat this kind of burger, well, just switch over to this kind of burger. Same kind of texture, same kind of mouthfeel, same kind of and so I view these very positively, even though, the meats have a lot of sodium added and they add saturated fat and, they're better. Absolutely, they're better. But ideally, we wouldn't want people to kind of stall there. We want people to continue to move towards eating even healthier. If you are choosing a plant-based milk, the healthiest is probably soy milk. Just in terms of nutrition density, you can get unsweetened varieties, better so you don't have the added sugar. and they are fortified with calcium. Of course, the best sources of calcium are those greens. How many times did we hear the word greens this morning? Whether talking brain health or eye health or heart health or the nitrates and all those, and the carotenoids. So low oxalate, dark green leafy vegetables. So that's all greens, with the exception of spinach, beet greens, and Swiss chard, which are fantastic foods, but just a little stingy with their calcium because of the oxalates. So all of the greens like bok choy and broccoli and kale, collards, etc. That's really the best source of calcium, just because of everything that comes along with it. Because food is kind of a package deal. That's why if you go to the Harvard Dietary website, they say, that the preferred source of protein is plants. Why? It's because food comes as a package deal. So instead of getting saturated fat and cholesterol and all you're getting, the fiber and the folate and the potassium, all these things that we're relatively deficient in as a country.
Yes, thank you. And I've also read on the Harvard website that maybe a lower amount, like closer to 700 milligrams of calcium, is sufficient through dietary intake as well. So it's a little bit more feasible to get it from the plant-based source rather than, if you're going plant-style eating, relying on the fortification. So my original question, I really appreciate you staying up to date on the nutritional literature. I would like to know if you have come across more data that further delineates organic-based meats versus inorganic.
So there's, and I'll address produce too, because that's a question people have. Is it worth buying organic, whether we're talking about meat or produce? So in How Not to Die, I talk about this modeling study that suggests that if half of Americans ate a single more serving of fruits or vegetables, we would prevent 20,000 cases of cancer every year. Half of Americans, a single more serving, brings about 20,000 fewer cases of cancer every year. But because they were talking about conventional fruits and vegetables, pesticide-laden fruits and vegetables, the extra pesticide burden on the American public would cause 10 extra cancer cases. So overall, we would just prevent 19,990 cases of cancer every year if people ate more produce, right? So that gives you a tremendous sense of the tremendous benefits to plant-based, to produce, versus the tiny bump in risk. Now you can say, wait a second, why accept any risk at all? Get all pros, no cons, all benefits, no risk by choosing organic? Great. But we should never let concern over pesticides stop us from preventing, from stuffing our face with as many fruits and vegetables as possible. I think that's the bottom line. In terms of conventional versus organic meat, the greatest concern is about these so-called PLOPs, which is persistent lipophilic organic pollutants like DDT and PCBs and dioxins, many of which were banned decades ago, but unfortunately have kind of built up the food supply, particularly the aquatic food chain. So that's kind of the biggest concern over that. And so we would expect that organic meat, which by definition, by the USDA 2002 standard, you cannot feed meat and bone meal to organic pigs, chickens, and cattle, meaning that they actually have to be herbivores. So normally we have millions of pounds of slaughterhouse byproducts, which we put back in feed. And so that's where we got the whole bovine spongiform cephalopathy mad cow thing and blah, blah, blah. But conventional animals end up kind of at the top of the food chain, like the eagles or the polar bears or something, concentrating all these pollutants. So we would assume that there'd be less of these pollutants in organic versus conventional meat, but unfortunately that's not what they found. The biggest, and so I have a video about the biggest study that ever looked at conventional versus organic. Unfortunately, you see the same toxic content. So we have a very polluted world. So it's a matter of just eating as low as possible on the food chain, which is, the plants themselves.
Thank you.
Hi. So my question is about eating disorders. Our population has a very, very high incidence of eating disorders. So when we recommend a plant-based diet, they tend to come back in 6 months, having just done 6 months of 400 calories a day of plant-based diet. Right. So what guidance do you have to balance this?
Yeah, so plant-based diets can often be used, like a vegetarian or vegan diet, can be used as a kind of a publicly acceptable mask of an underlying eating disorder. It's the kind of, you can say, oh, no, I don't want that because, I have a special whatever, I care about the environment or something. And so it's critically important to ask, particularly, adolescent women, what are the motivations behind, a particular eating pattern, and see how many calories they're actually getting in. There are a lot of calorically dense plant foods that we can, boost people's body fat so, women aren't losing their periods, et cetera. And that is the nuts and seeds, nut butter, seed butters, dried fruit, kind of trail mix where you like nuts and dried fruit. Smoothies, a great way to, kind of sneak lots of calories path. And this is particularly important for young children. They got these itty bitty stomachs. You can't feed a child salad. They're just not getting enough calories or not enough protein to even, for their growth rates. So that's why we need these really kind of, nutrient and calorically dense foods. And that goes for anyone who's losing too much weight.
Thank you.
Hi. A couple of things. First, a comment actually on the first question about food addiction, and just kind of a comment that like heroin addicts rarely are recovering on their own without support and help. And I think that even just trying to break lifelong habits, even if they're not true addictions, some people do have food addictions, some people don't, but either way, or in both cases, I think it's important for yourself, but also for your patients to identify reputable resources that can help with that transition and help work through all the barriers and challenges that people face in that process. And then my question is just kind of wanting you to address a very common topic when it comes to plant-based eating is protein. Sure. And especially like with everyday routine people, but especially also with those who are trying to either are muscle builders or in senior populations who need a little more.
Great. Thank you for those questions. Yes, to emphasize on what you said at first, the number one cause of dietary recidivism, people eating healthy and going back, it's not they didn't feel good, it's not that, number one is lack of social support. We're just surrounded. You're at a business meeting or with your family, or just the social pressures are such, it's hard to kind of stand out. And so hopefully that'll change as society starts eating healthier, but I absolutely agree. And so there's these wonderful resources now. One that I, when I still had my clinical practice, I used all the time. So there's an organization called Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine in D.C. They have a free program called the 21-Day Kickstart Program. Starts at the first of every month, completely free. Hundreds of thousands of people have done it. It's a bunch of different languages. And so you join as kind of a social media group, and you share you get daily tips and recipes, and you kind of share within the group of how to the various challenges, the barriers, and so the hope is that you really kind of dive in feet first for those 21 days, in hopes that at the end of 21 days you feel so much better that it's no longer just me as the doctor wagging my finger in their face, but their own body is telling them they're feeling better. They have more energy, they're better digestion, they less painful periods, whatever it is. And so then they have that kind of internal motivation to kind of stick with it. And so I think that's a really great resource. 21-Day Kickstart, you can tell that in a sentence to anybody, have them go sign up online. And the second question, of course, about protein. Anyone who doesn't know how to get protein on a plant-based diet doesn't know beans. Legumes, beans, split peas, chickpeas, and lentils. These are the plant protein superstars. The recommended protein intake is 0.8 grams per healthy kilogram of body weight, which most people eat way above that. Even those eating strictly plant-based diets tend to get about 16% more than their estimated average protein requirement. So, you can. How many times have you seen, kwashiorkor in your practice, or some of these, kind of protein calorie malnutrition? Right? It's not. We have diseases of excess. Not. We're not seeing a lot of pellagra and beriberi and scurvy these days. Most of our diseases are these lifestyle diseases. How many people have, no kwashiorkor, but how many people have high blood pressure in their practice, or type 2 diabetes? Or these are the diseases we really have to worry about. Of course, you have to get enough protein, but 97% of Americans reach that 0.8 grams, and the 3% that don't are typically people who are dieting or extremely restricting food across the board and just not getting enough food, period. But that's not the real question is, where are you going to get your potassium? 98% of Americans don't even reach the recommended minimum daily intake, 4,700 milligrams. 98% of Americans eat potassium deficient diets. 97% eat fiber deficient diets, don't even reach the recommended minimum daily intake of fiber. It's like these society-wide nutrition deficiencies that are really underlying some of the causes of disability and death in this country. Yes.
Thank you. Is the mic on? Okay. So it seems like you can't go anywhere where there's food without seeing something about gluten.
Oh, yeah.
How did gluten go up from being something good to something bad? Is this some kind of a Frankenstein creation by the American food industry to create more money? I just don't know what's going on with gluten.
It's amazing, right? So, in fact, there's some really fascinating articles written about that. So the question was about gluten. Like, when we were growing up, like, we never even heard of gluten. And now, like, gluten-free is like this, this thing everywhere. Okay. And so this is kind of this interesting phenomenon where the industry, the food industry will basically give us any kind of junk we want. We can have paleo junk, ironically, or vegan junk, or gluten-free junk, or whatever. They would just want to make processed foods to fit whatever kind of trends. So there's this trend towards gluten-free, which is based not only on the 143 or so Americans that actually have a celiac disease and actually really do need to stay off a gluten-free diet or live significantly shortened lives, strictly a gluten-free diet. And then about 1 in 1,000 people have an official wheat allergy where the tongue swells up and stuff. But it was this recognition of this third entity, this non-celiac gluten sensitivity, which, interestingly, if you do blinded trials, most people who think they have it actually don't have it at all. You can randomize people to rice powder or wheat powder. They have no idea what they're taking, which one. But there is a small subset, and it's about, it may be as large as 1 in 50. You can actually test them for this kind of the non-celiac gluten insensitivity, where they have these gastrointestinal symptoms when they eat gluten, even though they don't actually have celiac disease. And so we end up with, 2-3% of Americans that really have problems with gluten. And so for those people, I mean, they evangelize. Oh my God, I cut out gluten, I feel so much better, and go online and write a blog, say, get rid of this evil gluten. Well, it's evil for you, but it's like someone with a peanut allergy going on like, oh my God, did you know you drop dead if you eat a peanut? Maybe you do. Maybe you drop dead if you eat a peanut. But for most people, peanuts are perfectly fine. But whatever momentum that caused, then the food industry is like, oh, you want? Yeah, we'll give you gluten-free donuts. You want donuts? We'll give you gluten-free donuts. And then people saw gluten-free, and I think that, and then they're like, what's gluten? Oh, if it's free, maybe it's bad for me. And then it just started this whole crazy, but it's still just a small percentage, but, enough of a percentage to kind of start this ball rolling. I actually take the whole gluten craze. I got a lot of videos online talking about how to, talking somebody through, someone who feels they have a gluten intolerance and what you should do. You actually don't want to cut out gluten at that point, because then that undermines your ability to actually test for celiac disease, because then you don't have the small intestinal lining findings. So please check out those videos. Just type in gluten into nutritionfacts.org. But I see that it's really positive. The positive spin I like to take on it is the fact that basically there was this society-wide change in dietary thinking, like seemingly overnight within just a few years, and all of a sudden the whole industry, these massive industries swapping over and making entire lines of high-priced goods that for a premium they're making money, and people, I mean, it just shows that if all of a sudden people demanded healthier foods, then we might be able to shift the system over a little bit. If it can be done with something that really doesn't affect most people's health, imagine what would happen if we could actually get something that actually really did make a difference.
I know we're running low on time here. Is it okay to do another question? Okay. So I read an article. First of all, I completely agree with everything you're saying. I think it's amazing. I read an article I think it was last month's issue of the Journal of Family Practice about cholesterol, where the author said that there is not any evidence out there that lifestyle changes improve cholesterol. to give the devil his due, how are people still able to say this with all of the evidence that we do have that it does help?
Yeah, and so this was speaking of the corrupting influence of commercialism. So the egg industry, the egg industry has a federal program where every egg that's sold, you have to put in a pot of money, and goes to the American Egg Board, and they get to use it to advertise and to research fund. And the National Cattlemen's Beef Association has this too, blah, blah, blah. And so it's kind of our taxpayers' monies, which is overseeing the tens of millions of dollars being used to promote these agricultural products. I mean, that's what the USD is, to promote agricultural products. Of course, they're the same ones we put in charge of the dietary guidelines, which is a little problematic, as well as food safety. So with all this money, you can design a study to show that that dietary cholesterol has no effect on your blood cholesterol. How do you do that? There is a plateau effect. So once you get, I forget what exactly, so there's this amazing graphs, and there's meta-analyses of literally hundreds of interventional studies that you can show that where if you have very little cholesterol in your diet, even eating a fraction of an egg, you get a huge bump in your LDL cholesterol. Whereas once you're eating kind of standard American diet levels, once you're getting hundreds of milligrams of cholesterol in your daily diet, you add an extra cheeseburger on top of that, you're not going to budget much. And so what they do is they take people who have really bad diets and they add some eggs and they say, see, their cholesterol didn't change. It's like saying, it's like taking people with, smoking 2 packs a day and going up to 3 packs a day and saying, look, they're all still dying of lung cancer at the same rates. So it really doesn't matter. Okay, yeah. Well, you didn't compare it to the non-smokers. Then we get a difference. Then we actually have and so the same thing. And so you can show very clearly, but you could design a study where you don't get it. And so that's how you could cite a study which was published in peer-reviewed scientific literature that says adding cholesterol doesn't affect your diet. But of course, what they don't tell you is that that's only after a certain plateau.
Quick comment. Someone in my family thought she was allergic to gluten. I don't know if a doctor told her that. She cut it out. She no longer had diarrhea. And then someone at a health food store said, no, you need to use non-brominated flour.
Oh, okay.
And so they made their own flour bread anyway. Solved the problem completely.
Wow.
No allergy to gluten.
Interesting. One other thing about gluten is where's gluten found? Wheat products are a lot of the junk food we eat. And so in terms of primary sources of calories in the American diet, it's these ultra-processed foods, a lot of which is made with wheat, so like donuts and pastries and stuff. And so look, if someone actually cuts out donuts and pastries, you could actually be eating healthier, even though you're just quote-unquote cutting out gluten. It's like, 20 years ago when a patient came to me and said they were vegan, I was like, oh, you're shopping the produce aisle. Now it's like, oh, yeah, so I get up, eat my vegan donut, and then I have my vegan whatever crazy. It's like the junk food industry is happy to make vegan and all sorts of, and now you can eat just as unhealthy or even worse as a quote-unquote vegan. That's why I, like the previous speaker, really don't like vegan. That just tells you what you don't eat. As a physician, what we care about is what do you actually eat vegetables, right? That's why I like whole food plant-based. You're centering your diets around the healthiest foods out there. And it doesn't matter what you eat your birthday, holiday, special occasions, but on a day-to-day basis, we really should try to eat healthy and just center our diets around these healthiest foods. Let's break for lunch, and I'll be back right after lunch. Thank you so much, everyone.